Good afternoon. Welcome to the August 19th Go Bond Street Transportation and Drainage Subcommittee. My name is David Martin. I will serve as your chair of the committee. I hereby call the subcommittee to order. We have interpreters today to provide Spanish translation. Would you please introduce yourselves?
Yes, thank you. Hello, my name is Mario Barajas, and I will be serving as today's Spanish interpreter, along with my colleague Carmen Cota. I'll now take the time to introduce myself to our Spanish-speaking audience. Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Mario Barajas, y junto con mi colega Carmen Cota estaremos sirviéndoles como intérpretes de habla hispana. Un par de notitas de antemano. Queremos avisarles de que si es que van a dar un comentario público, les pedimos de que hablen lentamente y con claridad y también evitar distracciones de fondo. De esa manera podemos interpretarles de la mejor manera posible. Gracias. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. There will be a public comment period at the end of today's agenda, which will be up to 30 minutes in length. The Arizona Open Meeting Law permits committee members to listen to the comments, but prohibits members from discussing or acting on matters presented. Speakers will have up to 2 minutes to comment. However, prior to the start of the public comment period, I may specify a briefer duration based on the volume of speakers. If you're attending in person and would like to speak, you will need to sign up to speak at the kiosk located at the entrance of the council chambers before the call to the public item begins. For virtual participants, registration to speak must be submitted 2 hours prior to the start of each meeting. Speakers will be called in order received and will be given the virtual opportunity. Well, this is our very first meeting of our subcommittee, and what I'd like to do is sort of frame the conversation, if you will, on what our mission is as a subcommittee. As you know, the City of Phoenix is expecting to go to a bond election in 2023. Staff has worked extraordinarily hard to review projects that are really, really important to the city. They pared that initial list from $1.2 billion to $620 or $630 million, just over $600 million. You all know that the bond that the city will be seeking will be for $500 million. So clearly, that means we have some additional work to do. Staff has passed that baton to the various subcommittees, which means our committee is a little bit over. We need to be extraordinarily cognizant of our public, folks that are interested in engaging with the subcommittee. So we will take very seriously any recommendations you have. But a note of caution, and that is that our mission is to look critically at these projects and bring it down to a manageable level so that we can bring this to the voters at $500 million, not at the over 600 that we have. With that in mind, I just sort of wanted to frame our task at hand, and then starting with Ray, if we could have our subcommittee members introduce themselves, say a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get on to business. Ray?
Afternoon all, my name is Ryan Boyd. I'm with the Urban Phoenix Project. We've been a neighborhood and advocacy community involved in this for about over a decade now, and we're happy to work on this, complete streets, and a lot of other things to make our streets work for everyone. Happy to be here, Mr. Chair.
Good afternoon. I'm Carol Coles-Henry. I retired from the City of Phoenix about 15 years ago as an executive. And my responsibilities were as the director of the Equal Opportunity Department. So we had a huge contract compliance and minority woman, small business enterprise, disadvantaged enterprise program responsibility, working with the streets department, transit, and aviation. And I also, currently right now as a volunteer, continue to be interested in the work of the Streets Department, as well as Transit, as well as PD and others in a variety of capacities. And I work with the South Phoenix Concerned Citizens Group, providing partnership support to the Streets Department and others on very important streets-related and transit and parks projects. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Chet Tieford. I'm a civil engineer, spent nearly 30 years mostly working in the private consulting business. I'm recently retired and live in the Levine area, and I've been nominated to this committee by Councilwoman Ansari. I remain active in Levine, including setting up a nonprofit, levineclean.org. So happy to be here.
Well, thank you, subcommittee members. My name is David Martin. I serve as the president of the Arizona Chapter, Associated General Contractors. We represent contractors in the highway heavy civil division of work. We've been around Arizona since 1934. A native Phoenician, really happy to be here and looking forward to working with this committee. Our next agenda item is to nominate. The executive committee met, and they mentioned that each of the subcommittees needed to elect or appoint a co-chair or a vice chair, and if anyone's interested, I'd entertain a motion to nominate a vice chair.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I would move to nominate Ray Acuna for the vice chair position.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you, Mr. Vice Subcommittee Chair. Any words of wisdom you want to share?
Thank you, David. I respectfully accept and look forward to the opportunity to serve my community, City of Phoenix. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, members of the committee.
Thank you for serving, Ray. Our next agenda item is the staff presentation on the capital needs study. Now, I just have a quick question. Would you like the subcommittee's members to ask questions as we go, or do you want them to hold? And it's up to you, Mario, on what your direction you'd like us to take here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would suggest that we just have questions as we go. There are a lot of slides. It's a lot of information. Rather than waiting until the end of those, I think it's fine to just interrupt us and stop us as we go.
Okay, thank you. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the Streets and Storm Drainage Subcommittee, welcome, and thank you for your service and commitment to this work. It's really a pleasure to have you all and to work with you on the charge of this subcommittee. And I know we've got a lot to do in a short amount of time, and looking forward to getting that done. Presenting with me today is Keeney Knudsen, Street Transportation Director, and then to Keeney's left is also presenting with him Eric Froberg, the City Engineer. And given that we don't have a lot of time, I'll go ahead and get started on the agenda. So we will be walking through I'll walk us through just a quick review of what type of funding is already funding street transportation and storm drainage projects, just so you have an idea of what funds are available and currently in the mix. So we'll cover that. We will also then do a quick overview of the total capital needs study in the streets and storm drainage subcommittee items. So we'll cover those items, and then we'll get into more detail about the specific programs and projects that are contained and proposed in the prioritized list that you have. We'll do a quick overview of the future capital needs that are identified, but we won't spend a lot of time on that unless the subcommittee has some specific questions, and we'll go into those. But otherwise, we aren't going to focus on the future. But that information is in your packet and available to you. And then we'll get into the discussion and questions and any requests that you have, and talk about next steps at that point. So what are the funding sources that are currently funding street transportation? The main source is the state gas tax, also known as the Highway User Fund or Highway User Revenue Fund, or HERF. It's important to know that that's at 18 cents a gallon. That raises about $150 million a year for the City of Phoenix projects, both operations and capital projects. Has not changed in 30 years. So, so as you can imagine, the value of those dollars goes down each year. Every time inflation increases, that amount does not increase. We get further and further behind. So the impact of that fund is less and less each year. The other fund source is the street transportation portion of the Transportation 2050 Fund. So this is a city sales tax that's dedicated to transportation through 2050. Just under 14% of that tax goes to the Street Transportation Department. Most of that goes to transit, but some of that does go to streets to fund projects in the Streets Department. And then, of course, there are federal funds through competitive grant opportunities. The department is able to take advantage of federal funds that become available for these projects. And then for storm drainage and flood control projects, there's actually not a dedicated funding source at the City of Phoenix for those types of projects. And so sometimes some of these other funds are used for those projects, depending on the nature and scope of the project. Sometimes it's general funds or a combination of other grant funds, but it's important to note that there is no dedicated fund source for the storm drainage and flood control projects. We'll talk a little bit more about the capital needs study overall. So within this subcommittee, we've got a total of 7 projects, really programs and projects, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means. Total costs are just under $200 million. The GO bond fund portion of that is $161 million, just under $161 million. So the other fund sources equate to $39 million, with about nearly $650,000 in ongoing operating costs for those projects. So that's obviously, as we talked about, the total bond program being at $500 million. That's at about 77% of the proposed and prioritized projects in the total bond program. And so you can see there's a need to cut that number back as we go. A few things to consider as we go through these projects with you. So staff is not going to be presenting these in any priority order or order of importance. So that's just important for you to know because you're going to need to be thinking about what the prioritization is. What are the most important and urgent projects from your perspective? But at this point, we're not getting into the prioritization. We're just presenting the projects kind of in a way that flows best for the presentation. And so it's important that you know that. Some of what's proposed is more in a programmatic form, meaning the specific projects within that program, locations and specific scopes of individual projects have not been identified. And so there's a reason for that. There's an intentional reason why we set it up that way. And we'll get into that, why that is and why that is for some of these programs. And then there are also specific projects that do have a scope and a location assigned to them. So you'll see those as we go. We'll also talk about scalability of the projects and the programs. And basically that's just a way of saying how easy it is for the amounts that are dedicated to those programs or projects to go up or down. How easy is it for us to change the amounts that are allocated? And then the prioritization process is something that will come later. We'll be getting into that discussion, but first it's important that the committee really understand what's proposed, what's behind all the projects that are in your packet, why are they there, why are they needed. And so we're going to get into that now, and I'm going to hand this presentation off to Kini Knudsen to get into more about those proposals.
Thank you, Mario, and Mr. Chair and members of the subcommittee. We'll first cover the identified projects for the Streets and Storm Drain subcommittee area. But before I start, I did want to let you know that unfortunately our Assistant Director, Brianna Velez, who is going to present this information with Eric and I today, isn't able to join us today, but as we have another 3 meetings to go, you'll have a chance to meet her and hear from her as we go forward in this process. So the first program area we want to talk about here is Equity-Based Transportation Mobility Program. The focus of this program is to implement improvements that provide missing or inadequate street infrastructure to safely connect people of all ages and abilities to their important destinations in the neighborhoods of greatest need. Sorry, back here. It would first let you know about this program. It would be applied in a citywide basis, so not in a number of locations, which I'll outline those a little bit later. The proposed program that you see here, the request is $20 million in bond program funds. I'll note that, as Mario was mentioning, the program is scalable. So if the program remains in the overall GEO bond program, the amount requested could remain the same or be increased or decreased. If you recall, back in 2015, Proposition 104 came before the Phoenix voters and was passed by them. This became known as Transportation 2050 or T2050, so you see the title of our program here is related to T2050. So this program would be intended to use GEO bond program funding to supplement that Transportation 2050 funding focused on mobility improvement projects. And the needs have been identified through our department's efforts to implement the T2050 plan. When I may say T2050 or Transportation 2050, they're the same thing. So this slide shows an example of situations or environments where these mobility improvements are needed and where they would be applied. So you can see in the photos here, you've got lack of safe crossings for folks to be able to cross the street, lack of appropriate bicycle facilities, safe bicycle facilities for folks, lack of sidewalks as well in neighborhoods that haven't had those built as part of the original construction. Also lack of streetlights in many areas of the city that provides that visibility feature in there for people being seen and for others to be seen. Lack of tree and shade to be able to provide that comfortable option to be able to, if you don't have a vehicle and you need to be transporting, use the roadways for other purposes other than a vehicle. And then for persons with disabilities, the lack of ADA curb ramps in many of our neighborhoods as well to be able to provide that connectivity. So in 2016, in order to determine the targeted areas of greatest mobility needs as we were working on the T2050 plan, street transportation staff conducted an analysis of GIS data sets, and they included things as zero-card households and areas of persistent poverty, looking at high crash or high daily bus boardings. And what you see on the map on the right-hand side is actually just kind of a heat map. And to better understand that, when we overlaid these different selection criteria, the areas of greater need are in darker areas, so the darker brown areas are in greater mobility area needs based on the criteria that we used here. And the idea behind there was, as we look at this criteria, it was looking at what the mobility areas needs might be for people to get to and from their destinations. So from this analysis, street transportation staff initiated mobility studies, and they're in 12 areas of the highest needs that we identified through that selection criteria. So the areas bounded by the study areas are shown on this slide, and these studies were completed and identified mobility needs, including projects and costs associated with those projects. We imagine if this were to be included in the final bond package, a question might be, how would we go about prioritizing the implementation of projects? These 12 study areas have been ranked in terms of mobility needs. I'm going to fly them in individually in order that they appear in terms, the order they're going to fly them in are the terms of highest, greatest need for mobility needs all the way to the lesser one of the 12 that we have identified and completed studies on. So we had first the South Downtown Neighborhoods area is the highest area of need. Indian School, Grand Canal neighborhoods, second. Then Durango Curve neighborhoods, Golden Gate neighborhoods, Cuban Park neighborhoods, West Side neighborhoods, Capitol North, Roosevelt, South Mountain, and East Lake Garfield, Sunny Slope, and then Van Buren as there. So that's so we, as a reminder, our intent of the mobility improvements program is to safely connect peoples of all ages and abilities to their important destination. That's the overarching goal. What became clear when we were doing our work on these mobility needs study areas is we are significantly resource constrained. The total estimated cost of the projects identified in those 12 study areas is $187 million. Of the T2050 revenues that streets receives, we put about 15% of those funding into mobility improvement projects. Our projected T2050 mobility improvements revenues over the next 10 years is $98 million. So to complete the math equation there, in comparing the available revenues to the identified needs, we estimate over the 10-year portion, we have $90 million of unmet needs of programmed areas of needs. If this program were to be in the final BGO bond program, the funds would serve to supplement existing T2050 funds. So it wouldn't be supplanting them, it would be supplementing them to address more mobility improvement needs that have been identified. So now I want to take you through the kind of improvements the program would bring to the neighborhoods. First, I will be talking about sidewalks and turning them into streets that are more comfortable and safe for pedestrians. Next, we would take streets that are not accessible for persons with disabilities and provide improvements to make their trips less difficult and stressful. For streets without adequate visibility, where getting from point A to point B is a safety concern, not just a transportation concern, providing street lights that make you and others more visible to each other. And transforming areas where you just don't know how to cross the street safely to making that decision an easier one. And if you're using a bike to get around, this program would help separate and protect you from vehicles by creating an environment where more people feel comfortable enough to make this transportation choice. And finally, in times of the year like now, where there seems to be no protection from the sun, we would be able to provide more shade to make a more walkable and bikeable transportation corridors. The Equity-Based Transportation Mobility Program provides the opportunity to allow more people who don't have a transportation mode choice to make their daily journeys in a safe and more comfortable ways, but also to provide more incentive for those with transportation mode choice to make the choice to walk or bike for their transportation needs.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, Director, I like these ideas. One of my big questions here is what protections will voters have for these kind of improvements if it makes it through the process? Just remembering that when we passed T2050, that included some projects that a previous council had decided to remove through a rather expedited process. If we were to approve this as a bond, what security do voters have that they'll get the things that we're talking about here and it doesn't get swept somewhere else under mobility?
So I will say that there's always things that may happen unknowns, but I know in our 6 years of working on the Transportation 2050 program, we've worked very closely with the Citizens Transportation Commission on the allocation of those funds to the appropriate sub-program areas, and we haven't had issues with funding not being diverted to something else. And I think the commitment here, obviously, to the voters would be any funding through a GEO bond program would be, like I said, in addition to what we already have programmed in mobility improvements, and that would be the commitment of the city department to be able to focus on that.
Anything else? Any other questions for Kenny? Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So moving on to the next program area is the pavement maintenance supplement. This program intends to complement our existing pavement maintenance funding sources. We currently use both HERF or gas tax revenues and our Transportation 2050 revenues for pavement maintenance. With an allocation of GEO bond program funds in this area, it would help increase the city's focus on improving the condition of our streets. It would be applied citywide, but would be focused on our residential streets. The proposed program includes approximately $35 million in GEO bond program funds. So you might ask, you might be new to this whole pavement maintenance topic, so you might ask, how do we analyze and evaluate the condition of our roadways? I want to make sure you know that it is a very objective process. Streets uses a pavement management van like the one you see on the photo here that drives our city streets at least once every 2 years. And we have nearly 5,000 miles of city streets that we maintain. This analysis work leads to recommendations on how best to maintain our city streets. So the evaluation process ultimately provides us with a pavement condition index, or PCI, for our city streets. The map on the right of the screen shows the measured PCI for all city streets. I know it may be hard to see, but the green areas on the map of the streets are streets that are in better condition, while those in red or orange are in worse condition. I mentioned that this program would be focused on our residential streets, which comprise more than 80% of our total street miles, actually about 4,000 miles in total. You might be familiar with our nearly completed 5-year, $200 million accelerated pavement maintenance program that we've been working on diligently. That program focused on our major streets, and our residential streets were not included in that acceleration. So to better understand the PCI, and we measure and use for selecting streets for paving work, a PCI of 100 is essentially new pavement, whereas a PCI 0 is failed pavement, and I don't think we have any zeros in our city, thankfully. I think people wouldn't be happy with my job if we did have zeros. But to give you a better perspective on how this looks citywide, we've done a lot of work over the last, like I said, 4 or 5 years on our pavement maintenance, but our major streets, which have been a source of a lot of that acceleration, have 72% of those have a PCI greater than 50. But you can see also, if you compare that to the local streets that weren't part of the accelerated program, only about 67% of those have a PCI greater than 50. If you want to understand how the PCI score relates to what you might see as you travel on our roadways, or whether you're driving or biking or walking, this slide shows what an excellent, good, fair, or poor street pavement would look like. For the purposes of this program, we would focus on poor and fair condition pavements for a mill and overlay. So let's talk a little bit about pavement treatment types. We have a variety of pavement treatments, from crack seal to fog seals to slurry seals to asphalt mill and overlays. They all have different purposes and are applied based on the condition of the street. The focus of this program would be on an asphalt mill and overlay, our most comprehensive but yet also our most expensive treatment option, but it is also our longest lasting treatment. And the intent would be to extend the life of our pavement. This slide shows what an asphalt mill and overlay process is if you're not familiar with it. So the milling is actually the first photo up on the top there is where we go and mill down the outside of the roadway, and the intent there is to be able to, when we come back with new pavement, to have an even seal on our curb and gutter area, but we're able to, and then we're able to bring an overlay of a 1.25 inch thick layer of asphalt on top of there to create a new pavement surface. So from a need perspective, as it relates to residential streets like the ones you see in this photo, in our current budget over the next few years, we have identified and programmed funding to complete asphalt mill and overlay treatments on the streets of 45 neighborhoods. But we have also identified another 100 neighborhoods currently in need of pavement, new pavement, but are currently unfunded. And when I say neighborhood, what I'm really referring to is what we call a quarter section of the city. A quarter section is typically a ½ mile by ½ mile square, and in residential areas, that typically equates to about 3.5 miles of streets per quarter section. From a cost perspective, each quarter section costs approximately $1 million to repave with an asphalt mill and overlay treatment. In the current proposed program for pavement maintenance, the requested GO bond funding of $35 million would allow us to pave an additional 35 neighborhoods over the 5-year period, and that is above the current Street Transportation Department funding levels. It is also important to note that if the program were included in the GO bond program, streets would use our current objective analysis using our pavement management van and our pavement maintenance system to select the streets for repaving. The program is also scalable, so if the program remains in the program, the amount requested could remain the same, could be increased or decreased. Any questions on the pavement maintenance?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Acuna.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
See the smile on your face, so it's all good. I wanted to get a point of clarification in that this is a very popular program. It's very cost effective because it extends the life of a pavement, which is very expensive to replace if you let it get too old. But if I were a citizen, and let's say I was not going to get my street repaired this round, what process would I go to get you to look at these streets that perhaps this time wouldn't get the benefit of an overlay?
Mr. Chair, Subcommittee Member Acuna, that's a great question, and I'll tell you, with or without the funding attached to this, there is always opportunities for people, the members of the public, to request pavement maintenance on their street, or to be able to figure out where they are in line for schedule. And so we do take that under consideration, and in some cases we'll go out and take a closer look at it and to see where it falls in there to be able to gauge the condition of them and the right treatment. So if this doesn't go through, we will still continue to go through and do residential quarter sections right now we use our gas tax revenues, the HERF funding, for our residential streets, so we'll continue to do that. But if we were able to supplement that with the GEO bond program funding, that we'll be able to do more neighborhoods out there. So we just get more on the list in quicker time frame.
Thank you, Mr.
Any
Chairman.
follow-up questions to that point? Mr. Boyd?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director, would this include any other improvements to the streets while you're repaving them? Because we often talk about how we need to wait for a repavement to try to add bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Would this be an opportunity to do that, or is this going to be strictly the money is just repave exactly as it was?
Mr. Chair, Subcommittee Member Boyd, and members of the subcommittee, what I'll tell you that is when we go and do our repaving, that's the best opportunity for us to look at opportunities to be able to stripe in bike lanes. But these are residential streets. We don't typically stripe residential streets with bike lanes, but there is an opportunity sometimes chance with these ones that we'll have collector streets that are going through these residential areas that might get repaved as well, that will have an opportunity to be able to create bike lanes in that. With all of our overlay projects, we actually go through and do ADA ramp reconstruction to bring all of our the curbs, ramps up to current accessibility guidelines. And there are always opportunities. I will tell you, one program we've had very popularity with recently is our Cool Pavement program. And one of the conditions of being able to select it for a Cool Pavement program for a neighborhood is to have recently paved streets, so usually within the last 2 years. So this would help in those neighborhoods also be able to help us have additional neighborhoods we could apply Cool Pavement to as well.
Chair, may I follow up real quick?
You may.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director, so the one additional thing to this is, does this at all interact with other neighborhood traffic management? I love the bike lanes, but I know that's not going to be everywhere. So bike boulevards, for instance, are very easy to install. Not my favorite, again, would rather do bigger, but is that something that could be included in this, or is that intended to be included in this in the current proposal?
Mr. Chair, Subcommittee Member Boyd, as you know, as maybe a lot of people know, we are in the process of developing or updating our old bicycle master plan or our active transportation plan. As part of that, we're going to be doing a lot of work looking at where we can have those network connections. And a bike boulevard is a great location to be able to, or residential streets are a good location to be able to look for those bike boulevards. So as long as it can be part of a network solution, I think there's definitely opportunities through this program. We could look at bike boulevards being in concert with that, with the repaving.
Any additional questions?
Yes, Chair and Director, I just would like to find out, maybe you mentioned it, but initially it said there were 45 neighborhoods on the list, and now it's 35. Can you speak to the adjustment and what that might be about? And then secondly, my next question is, are those lists available in terms of priority areas that are on that list of 35 or 40? Share with us.
So, Mr. Chair, Subcommittee Member Coles Henry, great question. I will tell you, just to clarify, the 45 neighborhoods I mentioned in this slide that you see, oh, I was up there, but the 45 neighborhoods you said, that's how we have programmed right now for the next 3 years. So if this does not move forward with the Jump On program project, we have 45 neighborhoods we'll pave over the next 3 years. The 35 is additional to that 45 as it's currently potentially programmed through the bond program. So that would give us a total of 80, although those 35 would be over 5 years, whereas the 45 are over 3 years. To your next question about where residents or the public might be able to see where they fall on the list, we have a pavement management dashboard that's available on our webpage, Phoenix.gov/streets. If anybody would like to look at it, you can zoom in. It's an interactive mapping feature, and you can see where projects are planned for different neighborhoods and different streets. And but if any member of the public has a specific question, they don't see their street on the list, they can always contact us, and we can walk them through where there might be. And that list does look, the mapping tool on our webpage does look out several years in the future. So people, those 45 neighborhoods are likely on the mapping tool. I didn't check all 45 of them, but they should be on there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any follow-up questions? Anybody? Okay. Proceed, Kenny.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The third program is our storm drain replacement program. The intent of this program would be to proactively replace aging and deteriorated corrugated metal storm drain piping with reinforced concrete piping. Currently, there is no dedicated funding for these replacements, as our current methods are reactive in nature, with repairs done in problem areas only, which I will cover in the next few slides. The proposed program includes approximately $28 million in GeoBond program funds. So when I say reactive, what do I mean? Reactive means we find one of these, a sinkhole. These typically are traced back to a failure in the underground storm drain piping system. They can be large in nature or small and can cause various amounts of damage and have rippling impacts. This one on 59th Avenue and Indian School Road intersection is an example of that. When these developed, there's first a very real impact to the traveling public, whether you're a driver, transit rider, bicyclist, or pedestrian. This can really mess up your commute. But these also impact our underground facilities like power and gas and fiber optic lines, but depending on where they occur, they can also impact our sidewalks, curb, gutter, pavement, as well as our traffic signal pole, foundations, and conduits. So this is what a typical corrugated metal pipe or CMP failure looks like. You can see the deterioration over time associated with these pipes. In case you were wondering, this was an acceptable material for piping decades ago, and many miles of this piping were installed in the 1980s and early 1990s. In retrospect, this probably wasn't the best construction material for our arterial storm drain system because of this is an issue of aging infrastructure, but also an issue of our knowledge of the locations and the current condition of these pipings over time. And that's part of why this is a potential GeoBond program project. So in preparing for this presentation, we put together a list of the most recent sinkhole events over the past few years. On the left, you see a map of these locations shown with purple dots. On the right, you see a list of the locations with cost of each repairs. There are 6 locations here, and they totaled about $2.5 million to repair these 6 locations. However, when we were finalizing this presentation, we got a chance to add another location to the map-in list. So on July 31st, we had this sinkhole develop at 59th Avenue, just south of Indian School Road. And it involved a 78-inch storm drain. So for a little humor here, if you're doing the math in your head and you're a Phoenix Suns fan, yes, that equates to about a Devin Booker-sized storm drain pipe. We don't have the total cost of the repair of this one yet, but we will have those numbers soon. So before we talk, I want to talk about approach and how we would utilize the bond program funding for this project. If this program was included in the GeoBond program, I want to highlight the 2 photos here. The one on the left is the type of corrugated metal pipe that we'd be replacing, while the one on the right includes reinforced concrete pipe that would be used to replace the aging pipe. So our approach to this program, our first step would be data collection. To get a clear inventory of our piping network, and to then finally begin the construction work to address those areas of greatest need. So I'll pause for a moment to note that as the subcommittee looks for areas of potential reductions, you can see that there will be a time for evaluation spent up front with this program, as we would likely, and that would also actually probably likely reduce the amount of implementation we could actually do with the replacement system. But I would say that the work we do in those, that evaluation would help and be something we could use during this bond program cycle, but also for future bond program cycles. So after that, we would move to the assessment phase after we've done that data collection. That really is looking what the current condition of those piping is, and then using that condition to be able to prioritize where the best uses of dollars are and where the highest risk is for failure. And then finally, we'd move forward either repair or replacement. In most cases, it would be replacement, but there might be opportunities where we can actually reline the inside of those pipes to be able to extend the life of them without having to do a full replacement. And so if this also program is scalable, so if, as I mentioned, if it were to remain in the bond program, it could be, say, the same, go up or go down. And this is my final slide in this area. If anybody had any questions on this?
Any questions?
I have a question, and just given the uncertainty of the failures and when they might happen, I mean, it's nice you're doing the assessments up front, but just not clear to me that the GeoBond is the correct funding mechanism. Or if you do the assessments up front, then you may be able to reduce the amount of funding that's allocated for replacement?
Mr. Chair, Subcommittee Member Tiefert, exactly. That's kind of what I want to make my comment. So if the subcommittees has a responsibility to look at what they are going to forward through to the executive committee for inclusion in the bond program. This is one area I'm noting up front, that because we're going to have that assessment period up front, that's probably going to potentially reduce the amount of projects we can implement in the 5-year program, but we could still get projects done with the assessment. So if this definitely is an area where the subcommittee could look to reduce from the requested amount to something lower. And we can help get there if that's something the subcommittee would like us to look at.
Anything else, Mr. Tieford?
No, thank you.
Anybody else? Ray? Mr. Acuna? Is your microphone on?
This reminds me a lot of the utilities that go under the foundations of our house. You know, sometimes you get a water line breaks, a sewer line that breaks. If you don't take care of that, your house will sink. And philosophically, you know, our city used to be young. It's not as young as it was, so I anticipate what you're getting into is the beginning of maybe taking care of some of these older systems that are going underneath our foundation, making sure that the house doesn't settle. So this program doesn't appear to be big, but it appears to me that it's the beginning of acknowledging that Phoenix is at some point going to be moving towards maintaining its investment versus putting in more miles of new whatever. So I kind of like the approach. I understand that it's going to be hard to prioritize. I understand it's going to be hard to determine the mechanism, but I guess as I understand it, you really aren't setting priorities, and it's a programmatic approach, and I kind of see that as a programmatic approach to something that isn't going to get smaller with time. Is that sort of what this program is trying to do?
Subcommittee member Acuna, I think you had summarized it perfectly. That's exactly what the situation we're in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions for Kenny on this subject? If not, we'll move on to.
I have one quick one.
Yes, go ahead. Mr.
Director,
Tiefert.
how much would just the assessment and prioritization cost?
Mr. Chair, Subcommittee Member Tiefert, I don't have that information right now, but I can definitely work on that and get that estimate for you for the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Knudsen? Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the fourth program area is our Neighborhood Traffic Mitigation Program. The intent of this program is to install traffic calming and mitigating devices on residential streets. The proposed program could be implemented citywide and includes approximately $28 million in GO bond program funds. The purpose of a neighborhood traffic mitigation program is really twofold: to reduce speeds and to reduce traffic volumes on residential streets. In our current, the City of Phoenix Street Transportation does have a current street neighborhood traffic mitigation program, but it is limited to two countermeasure types: speed humps and speed cushions. So I've noted on here that the cost generally for those installations that we experience here. With the process that we have currently underway with our current traffic mitigation program, it is a petition process, meaning residents need to request it. They go through a process where they either support or show not support for moving forward with traffic mitigation devices with their neighborhood. And then based on a speed study that we do, this department conducts, that cost can be shared with the neighborhood on the installation of those speed humps or speed cushions. So for the proposed neighborhood traffic mitigation program that might be included in the GO bond program, street staff proposes the program continue to be a resident-driven process. We want to make sure there is community and buy-in and support when we're looking to be able to install these countermeasures in a neighborhood. But different from the current program, we would be looking to be able to do this at no cost to the neighborhood. The idea there is this would help drive equity across the city in addressing traffic mitigation, because this would be about whether a community supports it or not, whether or not they can afford to install or be a part of the cost-sharing process of installing these. The type of mitigation countermeasures would be determined through coordination and input with the neighborhood and based on the effectiveness of addressing the observed traffic issues. This program would be scalable, or if it would remain in the overall bond program, the amount requested could remain the same, go up, or go down. The following countermeasures our slides show additional countermeasures that could be included in this program, as well as some estimated costs for their installation. Here you see a choker, which is essentially a narrowing of the street through an area where the street might be a straight shot through. We also have a chicane, which does the same but in a different format to be able to move this traffic around, so it doesn't give them that straight shot. Also in this slide, you'll see a traffic circle, which is probably one of our most expensive traffic mitigation measures, but it can be there to be able to, as an alternative to a four-way stop, to be able to calm traffic going through a traffic circle area. And then you also have a speed table, which is an option in areas where you want to provide a safer pedestrian crossing that may not warrant a hawk pedestrian signal or other type of signal, but it does cause traffic to be able to slow down, to be able to have a very marked and raised crossing location for pedestrians. And that's the last I have on the neighborhood traffic mitigation. If there's any questions on this program.
Any questions on traffic mitigation? Mr. Boyd?
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Director. So with these being resident-driven, my one concern here is just when there's actual safety needs. I mean, I've lost a family member to somebody who got hit on a residential neighborhood street before because they're 40 feet wide and people decide to race through. So is there something here in this program, or I might be beating you to the punch to the next one, that will actually have the city go in where we know there's issues or where there's been cases and actually make these neighborhood situations safer? Also, well, no, I'll stop there. I'll stop there with that part.
So, Mr. Chair and Subcommittee Member Boyd, I think in this one, we would see it still being resident-driven because this is one, the unique thing about this versus the one we're going to talk about in a sec, the Vision 01, is this one is really about a community saying we want the city to come in and partner with us or want to come in and talk with us about what we can do to improve the quality of life, the situation in this residential neighborhood. It doesn't mean that we won't have other programs that might be able to work in a residential, but for this particular program, we really, the idea there is to have it resident driven and to be able to have that buy-in. But I will fully acknowledge there's times when we have street projects that are going to be apart from this program that might go into a neighborhood and do something different based on the needs and the basic situation that might be there.
Mr. Boyd, hold for a second. Mr. Tieford, and then we'll go to Mr. Boyd.
Yeah, Director, how effective do you think your public involvement, your community, neighborhood involvement effort is? I mean, these things are very controversial, right? And if you get a couple noisy neighbors that need this stuff, but then you may have 10 or 12 that really don't care or aren't verbal. So I'm just curious, it's very sensitive. I'm just curious how you feel about your process.
Mr. Chair, Subcommittee Member Tieford, you bring up a great point. Our current program requires typically 70% of the neighborhood to support putting these in, but then if where the devices are actually at, it requires 100%. Now, those numbers could be modified with this program moving forward, the GeoBond. We could look at something that doesn't require unanimous support, but a different level of support in there. We're open to that and working with the community, working with the council to define what that would be. But I think the important thing is we recognize that within the neighborhoods that there is this need, there is this desire to be able to find ways to be able to slow traffic or to reduce the traffic volume in some of these areas where they're seeing cut through traffic and speeds and things like that. So I'm open to it. We are open to working for what that would be the threshold to be able to get these installed in a neighborhood.
Mr. Boyd?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director, when we have projects on related streets, and sometimes we hear about how folks are worried that it's going to push traffic into these local residential streets that, frankly, are designed so you can kind of speed through them at the moment. Is this going to be something, if approved, that is going to be offered proactively in those situations? Because those residential neighborhood streets shouldn't be something you could speed through in the first place.
Mr. Chair and Subcommittee Member Boyd, I don't know if I can answer that really quickly and succinctly, but I will tell you we always are looking, especially in the core area of the downtown area and uptown area, where we're having development of how we can mitigate the impact of those developments through there. This one, I think like I said, we'll work through it. I can't give you a defined solution on what's going to happen on these ones, but I think there's definitely opportunities for us to partner with others to be able to do similar things outside of this program. But I hear what you're saying, and it is a challenge.
Any follow-up questions? If not, proceed.
So the fourth program that we have here to talk about is the Vision Zero implementation. It is a $25 million in GeoBond funding that's asked for right now. I will tell you, this is one of those areas where I see the greatest need for our department. Phoenix is by far the worst large city in the country when it comes to traffic-related fatalities on our roadways. Our council has been focused on this issue and provided us unanimous approval to develop a road safety action plan. They did that in March 2021. We've been working diligently on the development of that plan and are scheduled to present this plan for council approval on September 7th. Earlier this year, our council also adopted a Vision Zero resolution, which among other things directed city staff to incorporate Vision Zero principles into our road safety action plan. If you aren't familiar with Vision Zero, it is based on the concept that traffic fatalities on roadways are preventable. If council approves this plan early next month, they will also be allocating resources to implement that plan. The $25 million in GEO bond funding would help to leverage other funding sources, including federal funding opportunities, in order to speed the implementation of the safety projects aimed at reducing and ultimately eliminating serious injuries and fatalities on Phoenix streets. To provide you some perspective on the seriousness of the issue, this slide shows some crash statistics for Phoenix, and maybe you've seen this, maybe you haven't, but we average a little over 30,000 crashes per year. That results in about 85 per day. Two of those happen, crashes each day result in severe injuries, and then sadly, one fatal crash every other day. That is enough to fill a 737 every year. But if you want to know what's kind of happened over the last few years, this is where it gets really sobering, is 185 fatalities in 2020, and you know that was when we were entering the pandemic and we had a lot of things going on that traffic wasn't at its normal. But then when things came back, we saw 231 last year. And the numbers we have to date through May, and these are unofficial, is 112 fatalities. And if you do the math, we're going to surpass where we were in 2021. That's why this is serious. That's why the council's so focused in on Vision Zero. So how would we go about utilizing a GEO bond program to select projects to make our streets safer for all users? First and foremost is the use of data. Our team's analysis and evaluation efforts led to the development of a high injury network for Phoenix. This high injury network looks at locations where there are higher incidences of serious injuries and fatalities on our roadways. So the map on the right actually shows the problem areas, area locations in Phoenix. The dots represent intersections, while the lines represent roadway segments or corridors that have higher incidence of serious injuries and fatalities. If this were to be part of the bond program, street staff would use this map to identify, select, and implement projects for implementation using the bond program funding and other funding sources as well as pursuing federal grant funds. So the safety emphasis areas for our safety projects would focus in on pedestrians, nighttime crashes, and signalized intersections. And there's a term we use, it's called KSI, or killed or seriously injured crashes. And so when we talk about reducing KSI crashes, that's what we're focused in on. 44% of our total crashes involve pedestrians, even though our traffic fatalities involve pedestrians, even though only 2.5% of our collisions actually involve them. 45% of the crashes happen during those times when visibility is not at its peak, despite of only 29% of those crashes occurring during those times. And finally, at signalized intersections, 43% of our KSI type crashes happen at those signalized intersections, with less than 6% of our traffic signals or signalized intersections accounting for 12% of all KSI crashes. So you start to see that is data we use to figure out where we have the most serious issues when it comes to KSI type crashes. So what are the types of improvements we might be able to work on and do and use for this type of a program and using this fund? This is, we have a thing called a HOC signal, high intensity activated crosswalk. It's focused on pedestrians, but you can take an area where you don't have a safe crossing location and turn it into something like this. This is at 7th Avenue in Cocopah. And then we also have areas of roadway lighting improvements like this one on 18th Avenue, on Bethany Home around 18th Avenue. In this case, what you want to look for here is our old standard was only having street lighting on one side of an arterial street. Our standards now is having dual-sided lighting. So this obviously brings in more visibility, more lighting. People are able to be seen more easily out there, and whether it be vehicles or people out on the street, and it creates a safer environment on the street. So that's what it would be used for as well. And then also traffic signal modernization and making our traffic signals safe. This one at 10th Street in McDowell. And you see the upgrade here is we added lighting around the intersection. We also added additional signal heads, which is up to current standards, and also video detection as well. This helps us to be able to determine how much traffic's at the signal and be able to adjust timing to more safely and efficiently move people through the intersection. And I say not just people, but we also have bicyclists and pedestrians as well it's able to look at. And now I'm going to move it over to Eric.
Hold on.
I'm sorry.
Hang on a second.
Don't want to bury the lead. Sorry, I apologize.
Let's see if there are any questions in reference to that last subject matter. Yes, sir?
Yeah, Director, you mentioned leveraging on this. Is that, how much could you leverage, do you think?
Mr. Chair and Subcommittee Member Tieford, to give you an example, in the bipartisan infrastructure law that was recently passed, they had a program come out called Safe Streets for All. Over the next 5 years, that will have $1 billion per year that's available for us to pursue. And in implementation, which is what we're seeking, there's about $600 million. So we plan on seeking a grant, actually, that we're going to turn in on September 15th that will ask for $30 million from the federal government, and we will have a match of about $7.5 million. So we can turn $7.5 million of local funds into $37.5 million of total project value. And we expect there's other opportunities to be able to leverage funds both at local, state, and federal level.
As a follow-up to that, is there a timeline on that? Does this breach outside of the 2023 timeframe, or would we be able to bind that prior to 2023?
So, Mr. Chair, so this being a 5-year program, that the bipartisan infrastructure law has funding for 5 years, so that would move out, this being the first year, so we have 4 additional years. Now what happens after that 5th year, whether those programs still stay in the federal government's plan, it may or may not, but either way, we have additional funding, local funding, that we're going to have allocated apart from the GO bond program funding to be able to implement these safety improvements.
Okay, Ms. Coles-Henry, go ahead.
No, he just addressed my question. Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay.
And yes, Mr. Acuna, make sure you turn your mic on.
Yes, sir. It's on. Mr. Chairman, Kenny, I know this is a topic that's close to many of us who've lost family members, and I know it's important to you. And as I see this, it's really almost law enforcement has part of this, and engineering's got part of this. You're talking about the engineering part of this, and you're talking about focus. And I think that's kind of what's sticking out. I don't know if I see a specific program and a specific reduction, but what I see is a focus and a process. Is that?
Mr. Chair and Subcommittee Member Acuna, great observation there. Because of the GO bond program and what you have to do to be able to bond for that funding, we need to be more focused on capital type improvements for this funding. However, the other funding we have allocated at the city level for this can be used. We have what we call the 5 E's of traffic safety, where we have evaluation, education, enforcement, engineering, and equity. So we have 5 E's, and those will help drive our investment decisions when it comes to traffic safety. So yes, these will be more focused on engineering because of the capital nature and the need to be able to bond for those types of improvements. But our other funding will be used for looking at enforcement, evaluation, and education, and also the equity component.
I'm curious, where does the law enforcement connect to the engineering? How does that? How do you connect that?
Well, great question, and I think that comes in different ways. And in our road safety action plan, we have about 42 strategies that address different areas in here. But I will tell you, it's not just about law enforcement. We have multiple city departments that are going to be involved in this process, whether it be our planning and development department, our parks department, police and fire. But from the police perspective, I think we work hand in hand when it comes to engineering and enforcement. And what I like to say is, from an engineering side, that we do our best to be able to guide or influence behavior of people who use our roadways, but ultimately we don't have the ability to control people's behavior. And so there's always that element. We do our best on that, but without some enforcement, we can't do our job completely, and vice versa. Enforcement isn't just the solution. We've got to be able to do things to be able to guide better behavior and decision-making out on our roadways.
Thank you, Kenny. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I just want to follow up on the enforcement aspect of this. There's also the educational, of course, aspect. Will that be factored in and built in this process as well?
Mr. Chair, Subcommittee Member Coles-Henry, yes, when we look at the road safety action plan that Council will hear, there will be strategies and objectives within that will address all the different 5 E's of our traffic safety. Enforcement is a piece of that. I don't see necessarily funding through the GO bond program involving enforcement with what we're talking about here. But like I said, the local funding that we have allocated, and if there's additional funding opportunities that might be focused on enforcement, we'll look to pursue those as well if they are in coordination with the implementation of our road safety action plan.
Mr. Tieford?
Yeah, Director, there seems to be redundancy between the project revision 0 and the equity-based improvements. Can you explain the difference?
Mr. Chair and Subcommittee Member Tieford, the overlap may be in some things that we're able to do to be able to provide safe access, but I'll back up a little bit and talk a little bit about the equity-based transportation mobility program. It is focused, when it was developed, it was focused on providing people in neighborhoods with safe access out to transit corridors or transportation corridors. So where you have neighborhoods that don't have safe sidewalks or don't have street lighting that guides them safely to get to a bus or to the light rail or transportation corridors. Whereas this is focused in on looking at all roadway users. It could be vehicles, bicyclists, pedestrians, however anybody gets around. It's looking at where we have incidents of serious injuries and fatalities and putting in countermeasures in place to address those. I will tell you that through this whole process, we're concerned about protecting the most vulnerable users and being able to invest those funds where we can do the most good in reducing those serious injuries and fatalities. And one of the things with the road safety action plan as well, it's going to have performance metrics. So it's going to be able to provide us that feedback when we invest in making something safer. Does it have the intended consequence? Did it follow through and make sure that that was actually achieved? So there'll be things like that. But the difference there, I would say, is mainly one is providing access and safe access out to transportation corridors, meaning the equity-based transportation mobility, whereas Vision Zero implementation is more about addressing areas where we have serious injuries and fatalities on our roadways, wherever they occur.
Mr. Boyd? Oh, anything else to follow up on that, Mr. Tieford? Mr. Boyd?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director, I'm really concerned about making sure that when we talk about safety, that we're talking especially about vulnerable road users, because, I mean, you can talk about designing a freeway. It's very safe for the drivers, but it's not at all safe for the pedestrians or the bicyclists, and we're talking about major city streets. What can we do to make sure that those engineering things are there? And noting, frankly, that there are things with enforcement and education, but I think the engineering part is crucial here, because I'll tell you, walk up on Roosevelt, you're supposed to legally yield to the person in the crosswalk, and that just doesn't happen. And we don't have people sitting there, and we probably shouldn't have people sitting there all the time. So I'm concerned about making sure that this money goes to those actual improvements for hawk lights, things like that. Ironically, a little bit cheaper than intersection things, but I'm concerned that people that talk to me are going to be very concerned about this money being diverted just to adding extra lights on top of each lane, is my thing. So what protections can we have for that?
Mr. Chair, Subcommittee Member Boyd, I think the best thing I can offer you on that one is the fact that when we do these investments, we'll be using that high injury network. Because I think when people hear these different safety improvements, they get concerned, is this going to be across the city, 520 square miles, across our nearly 5,000 miles of city streets? My interest is making sure wherever the funding goes, it goes to where we have those intersections, those roadway corridors, where we have issues. Because that's where if we see that's where we have serious injuries and fatalities, that's where we should be focusing our time and investments in. So when we're looking at those areas, I think we have a number of strategies that we're going to focus in on that is a different way of thinking to make sure that we have the intended results. It doesn't make any sense for us to go and make investments in an intersection or a roadway corridor if it doesn't do its job of reducing the serious injuries and fatalities that are at that roadway. So that would be my commitment there, is the fact that we're going to be using a mapping and data tool to be able to see where do we have the issues, and that's where it's going to drive the investment. So I wouldn't be wanting to take that money and put it somewhere where we don't have issues or don't have problems.
Anything on follow-up on that, Mr. Boyd?
Just a quick comment that I think myself and many others are looking forward to seeing the full plan, and hopefully that is a little bit more concrete for that.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Mr. Knutson, my question is sort of similar to Mr. Tieford's, and that is he saw the similarity between equity-based and neighborhood traffic mitigation. I sort of saw the similarity between Vision Zero and neighborhood traffic mitigation. Is there any opportunity there for some fungibility in those two, or are they pretty much distinctly separate?
Mr. Chair and members of the subcommittee, I think the distinction I draw there is that neighborhood traffic mitigation has those two intended benefits, looking at lowering speeds and lowering traffic volumes. It does have a safety benefit. Those programs do have a safety benefit. But if you look at our high injury network, the majority of all those incidents, the higher incidents of fatalities on our roadways, aren't occurring in our residential streets. They're happening on our major streets, whether it be the intersection or roadway corridors. So I think that's where the distinction would be. The neighborhood traffic mitigation may improve safety in a neighborhood, whereas the Vision Zero implementation plan is going to be focused in our hardest hit areas, which are typically our arterial streets and our major collectors.
Thank you. Anything else on this subject? If not, I think you're going to turn it over to Mr. Foberg.
I will do that.
Thank you, Kenny. Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. Similar to Mario and Kenny, I want to thank you for your efforts in this very important endeavor for the city. I think the next two programs that I will be talking about pretty apropos with us being currently under a severe thunderstorm and flash flood watch over the next day and a half. So we will be talking about some of the two of the programs here related to floodplain. One thing kind of right off the top I wanted to talk about, so Kenny and Mario had talked a little bit about scalability. These two programs have similar scalability in that they aren't just something where we can say, hey, let's do 15% of that, or 15% less of that, or 20% less. These are very much programs that are based on specific projects. So if we were to scale these back, which we could do portions of these projects, but there is an order that would that they need to be constructed in, and if we weren't to do all of the project, they would just be a little less effective than they could be, but it's not quite a straight linear kind of scalability on that. So I just wanted to kind of mention that before we get started here. So the first one, the Hohokam Drainage Area Program. This has a request here of a total project amount of $55 million, but the GO just has a request of $27 million. With that, we have the ability, we have basically a 50% coupon, or we have a discount that we can do here, because we have the ability to leverage the flood control district for the other half. So if this project were to move forward, the committee here has the ability to effectively approve $55 million worth of improvements while only spending $27 million. But a little bit into the specifics on this one. This is based on a drainage study that the flood control district did. This would provide a 10-year level of protection, and generally the benefiting area is from basically South Mountain to the Western Canal. So, and I know that a few of the subcommittee members here are interested in either Levine or South Phoenix, so these will hit home, as you say. So here are the reason that we'll be having, that we're proposing these, right? Pictures like this, water running off of streets or over canals through backyards, or flooding residents or structures' front yards, having so much water that trash cans start floating away, or having parking lots that just have way too much water in them. So what we end up having here, and just a couple more pictures here of some flooding that has occurred. A lot of the flooding that occurs in the Hohokam drainage area is based on ponding behind either the Western Canal or Highline Canal, just based on water coming off of the steep South Mountain, and then it flattens out as it gets into Levine, and the water generally loses its velocity and just kind of ends up sitting there. So these are projects that have been identified from previous flooding concerns and complaints that we receive from the public, or that we witnessed based on previous storm events. So again, talked a little bit. Here's just a graphic that shows the study that was done by Flood Control District, and shows kind of the limits. It's a pretty large area. Down there at the bottom, kind of south of Highline Canal, as we talked about, in between Highline Canal and South Mountain, are a few numbers there, and we'll talk about each of those. Those are the projects that were identified within the study. So what we want to talk about here, and we've listed these out, These are the 8 separate projects that have come out of the Hohokam drainage study that this project, if it were to be included, or this program, if it were to be included within the GO bond, would be able to, again, leverage a 50% discount, we call it, though. The numbers that are there in red, those are the city's portion or the GO bonds portion, so the total project is, of course, twice that. So we will go over each of these here pretty briefly. Again, if we total up all of those dollars there, it tends to be, it's around just under $28 million. So the first project is, and this is where kind of the scalability comes in a little bit. If we were to pull back on the next, on projects 2, 3, and 4, which we are talking about, project 1 would still have to happen because projects 2, 3, and 4 all drain down to this first basin here. So redevelopment of Circle K Park is the first one. This would provide a detention basin or a improved detention basin to capture the water, and then has a place for the next 3 projects that we'll talk about, somewhere for that water to go and to sit instead of being in a parking lot or somebody's front or backyard. Project number 2, it's some storm drain running within 14th and 15th Street, ranging in size from, I think it's 40, it's pretty small text on there, but 48-ish inch storm drain, so pretty large diameter, a couple barrels storm drain. So some pretty significant storm drain, but again, outfalls into the Circle K Park, which was that first project that we talked about. The next one, project number 3, some storm drain and some high capacity inlets to capture the water, to get it off the street, to get it into the storm drain, running in 16th Street, and then it makes its way over to Basin 5 into the Circle K, basin to be retained. And then the last one, again, in regards to draining into the Circle K basin, is the South Mountain Avenue drainage. So again, some more large diameter storm drain and inlets that would basically run down South Mountain Avenue and outlet into the basin. Similar, the other 4, there are 4 other projects within the Hohokam. We kind of moved over a little bit. Again, similar to the other one, this would be the project that would have to be first because it is, again, implementing the basin and basically creating the location for the stormwater to go. A proposed detention basin to be located near the Highline Canal and 20th Street. So again, as we talked about at the beginning, water basically is impounded behind the canals, so it makes sense that the location of the basin would be where the water is already ponding. And the next few projects help the water get there a little more expeditiously and not through the roadways. Storm drain here, project number 6, some more storm drain along 20th Street and Euclid Avenue. Again, this more large diameter storm drain, but it will outlet into basin number 11. Project number 7, this one, again, if we were looking to pull one back, we would need portions of project number 6, because as you can see, the storm drain runs down, I think that's 19th, I think there, and then it goes down South Mountain and would need a little bit of 6. So again, you can see it's a little harder to just say, hey, let's do 25% less of this. The last one here is basin number 8, or is basin number 10, project number 8. It's a proposed detention basin on the Pueblo Scout Camp. There is existing storm drain in that area, but it doesn't necessarily have it's not as efficient as it could be as retaining water. So this would be a project that can be done pretty independently of the other ones that we talked about, but this one would help to leverage existing storm drain that is already in. So I think with that, I will stop at that one to see if there's any questions about this one.
Any questions on that? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you. So you've identified 8 elements. Are they all leveraged with the flood control district?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Tiefert, yes. All of these projects, if we were to go, we've talked with flood control district. They are aware that we are putting these in the GO bond, and that if successful, they are agreeable, and they believe that these are successful projects. I mean, ultimately, these are projects that their study has identified, so we're just hoping to find funding for their study, or for the improvements within their study.
Follow up, I'm curious, is there a timeline on their money or not?
Mr. Chair, Subcommittee Tiefert, there is not. As soon as we are able to provide our 50% share, their money would be readily available.
Nice. Final, have your construction cost estimates taken into account the substantial increase in construction costs over the last 2 or 3 years, what, 30, 40%?
Yeah, great question, Mr. Chair, Subcommittee Member Tieford. Yes, we have worked very closely, and in my role as city engineer, I've worked with all of the different subcommittees to make sure that the monies that we have planned within the GO bond they have, as best we can, anticipated cost increases over the life of the GO bond. So we've taken numbers, and based on where we've slotted them in within the 5-year program, we have increased that to do our best, knock on wood, to accommodate for those cost increases.
Anything else, Mr. Tieford? Adam Coles-Henry.
Yes, just briefly, Chair and Mr. Engineer. I just have a quick question. With the current changes in the economic development in the area, do these 8 elements factor in the shifting of the water flow off of the mountain based on that activity?
Mr. Chair, Subcommittee, Coles-Henry, yes, the study anticipated as best it could with the land uses that were already programmed within or have zoning for now. As changes are made, and one of the projects that Keeney had talked about, the storm drain and the assessments and those types of things, that is one thing that he and I have talked about, being able to proactively kind of look ahead and say, okay, look, right now it's planned for, let's say, a 48-inch pipe, but if we know that there's another big development and those types of things, as we are going, we will verify that these sizes are correct. And if they're not, we will upsize them to make sure that we are trying to right-size it and future-proof it as best we can.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Acuna.
Mr. Chairman, Eric, I don't know of any natural disaster that Phoenix has more exposure to than flooding. We're fortunate that we don't have earthquakes, tornadoes, et cetera, but I tell young engineers, you don't become an engineer until you go into somebody's home that floods. It's the most devastating thing I can imagine as an engineer. That water is not drinkable. It's contaminated with everything you can think of, and it is probably the most likely thing to happen to a home in Phoenix, Arizona, middle of the desert. I know it's tough for folks to believe that. I'm very excited that you folks have included this. I understand that there's a lot of projects and it's complex, and nobody knows this dance better than me. You know, you're working with a county agency, God bless them. And I think Kenny nailed it, and I think this is what we have to focus on. There's no dedicated funds for storm drains. So what you're doing is you're attempting to leverage the county. And by the way, those funds come from Phoenix. Those come from secondary flood tax levy. We look at our property tax, so we kind of contribute to that, but we also have to come up with our share. What you're looking at is our share, because we have no dedicated, that is partnered with our secondary flood tax that comes from Phoenix properties that the county manages. These studies basically identify, through an engineering analysis, which areas would benefit from this investment, because you can't do it all at the same time. That's why they build these basins first, because that's where the pipes feed into. And my point is, I'm excited and I support the projects. I guess we'll call them projects. I'm curious ultimately how we're going to fund it ultimately, because I think our citizens who have experienced flooding, the challenge that I've seen is when they see a project, they expect a result. And I think there's a process that takes sometimes years in getting the result. So we want to temper this promise, because ultimately we go to the taxpayer and we say, look, we need you to vote to approve this. And I think their expectation is, I want it now. And I think what we have to say is, look, we've got a plan and we have no funding. This will help with the funding. And at some point, there's a process where we work with a partner agency across the street. And ultimately, you're looking at possibly more than a few years to have this fully functional. And I think that is part of us establishing our credibility with the taxpayer, that we tell them, look, if we don't start now, we're just going to wait more and more years. However, we still have this timeline that no one will be able to tell you what that is. But the fact that you're starting with our share of the cost share, I think is, I guess I'll say, better than nothing. And I just wanted to make that point because I hope we continue to support flood control, because there's no alternative other than what you're proposing with this bond program on these two areas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Eric.
Any follow-up on that, Mr. Foberg?
Mr. Vice Chair, well said. All of that is true when you talk about the types of natural disasters. There's not hurricanes and earthquakes and all those things. It's flooding that happens here. And I know that, and you will see as we talk a little bit about some of the future priorities that we talk about, there is more drainage projects identified under the future priorities going forward. If I could get all $500 million for flooding, we could use it. But there are several other departments that have some input on that, and there's lots of other needs that the residents of Phoenix have. So it's that balancing act of being able to leverage the work that we in the Flood Control District have already done with studies to identify projects, and then leveraging other sources of funding, as you said, to make this happen. So, yeah, that flooding is definitely one of those that, and you're right, it is sad, and it's heartbreaking when you see homes being flooded and cars and properties and structures being flooded. So hopefully these projects are a start in the right direction, assuming that the subcommittee is able to have them stay within the bond program. But it's the first step of many projects that would be needed.
Any additional questions or comments on the Hohokam project? Anybody? If not, we'll move to the Levine project.
Okay. So similar to the last one, this is in basically the same types of projects, just in a different area, in a different study area. This one, again, was studied. This one was actually studied twice. So this one is a little bit different in that it has 23, this one, again, we'll talk a little bit about the funding, $23.5 million, 11.5 coming from hopefully the GO bond. Again, we have that kind of 50% discount because we will be able to leverage the flood control district for the other half of the funding. The Levine Village area has seen considerable development to Subcommittee Cole Henry's point here of development in the past, and much of this based on private development and those types of things. So a study was done let me make sure I get the year right, in the Flood Control District did a study in 2017 to identify some of these projects. The City of Phoenix did a follow-up study to get a little bit more in depth that was just completed this year. The original study had established 10 different projects. Some of those the Flood Control District has moved forward with construction. We're going into Dobbins. Dobbins and 19th is a project that's currently underway. But then there will be 4 additional projects that we'll talk about here. Again, there are no shortage of flooding photos that we could put up here from City of Phoenix, right? Roadways full, water coming from every which way. Water may not feel like it, but it is a super powerful force, and we learn about that in all of our schooling and stuff, that you don't mess with water. But here, kind of the outline, slightly different area than the Hohokam area, but you can see kind of a very large area that the 2 different studies had looked at. So the 4 projects that we'll be looking at here, they're listed here, and there's a slide for each one of those. But these are the 4 projects that are included within that $11.5 million. The first one, $5.7 million. Again, that's 50% of the cost. Some storm drains down Dobbins and down to 47th Avenue. These will connect into some existing storm drain that is already in place, so it's very much an extension of a previous project. Next one, some storm drain, and we tried to highlight there with the red text so you could see them a little better. Some tying into some future, we're gonna have a stub that leads into some future storm drain so that it can be extended, but this is about a $4 million our share project that would extend the lateral down 15th Avenue and east into a basin on the Regional Police Academy. Lindo Park storm drain, again, these are existing storm drain that we're just providing some extensions to. So this one's, I should have said the Levine projects are a little different than the Hohokam projects because some of the Levine infrastructure, much of it is already there. So these are just extensions of. So as you can see, this one, $1.5 million to extend some storm drain, some reliever storm drain between Lindo Park and then a little bit up of 17th Avenue. And then the last one is this one is kind of the outlier of the other ones. All the other ones were storm drain. This one is a drainage channel, so an open channel along Olney that will then come down 35th Avenue. That's about $700,000, and again, that's 50% of the project cost. So that's the last slide on this one.
Eford?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Eric. I believe some of these benefit District 8 as well as District 7. They're identified in the program as District 7. I'd suggest, you know, it does benefit District 8, and that be noted.
Any other, Mr. Boyd?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you guys have estimates of how many residences and people each of these elements and each of these plans will affect?
Mr. Chair, Subcommittee Member Boyd, I don't, but we can start to look at that information for the follow-up. When we do the studies end up more looking at benefited area, numbers of acres, and those types of things. But I think that's something that we could put together if that's something the committee is looking for a future meeting.
Anything else?
I think a follow-up comment regarding Mr. Boyd's comment there. You know, this is right now relatively lightly developed, but there is a ton of development going in, including single-family residential, multifamily residential, and these direct areas. So when you're looking at the benefits, I would, you know, be sure to look forward also. Thank you.
To that point, is there any calculation dealing with property damage? I know you're dealing with people, and that's really important to, you know, to Ray's point, but there's also additional ancillary problems that rise from flooding. Don't want to put you through a bunch of hoops. We know intuitively that there's a problem, but I guess what I don't want to lose sight of is there's not only the folks of individuals being impacted, but their property is also impacted.
Sure, Mr. Chair, that is information that we can, based on previous claims and complaints and those types of things, that I'll have to get with our finance folks to see the record keeping that we've done, but I'm sure we have that kind of information. We can put that together for you.
I just didn't want that to get lost. That's all, not necessarily to go track the information down, but just that there's layers of impact here when it comes to flooding. Anything else? Any other questions? Are we at the conclusion of the overview, Mario?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this concludes our presentation, our slides to you. Actually, there's one more that we were going to cover, which was just a quick overview of the future capital needs, which if you look within your packet, you can see more detail there, but totaling about $92 million worth of GO bond funds and $123 million in total projects. And so that information is available. We can take a look at that if you desire. But that's the conclusion of our formal presentation. You've asked a lot of great questions along the way, a lot of great discussion, but happy to take any additional questions and requests from you.
Any additional questions? I just want to make an observation, Mario. We have three categories right now. We have the Hohokam, the Levine, and we have the Vision Zero. All three of those have a match, so we have an opportunity to grow that funding. Is that correct? And am I missing anything? on additional matches in those other categories, or are those really the three that we're talking about that have matches?
Yeah, you're absolutely right on those three. I would say on the mobility program, which is a program that's already funded by the T2050 program, we would be supplementing that funding, and so that's an additional fund source.
Which one is that? I'm sorry.
That was the first program, the equity-based mobility program. And I would say that also probably has some opportunities within the federal bipartisan infrastructure law to seek some grant funding from the federal government there as well. We don't know how much at this point, but there's certainly an opportunity to match within that program. The pavement maintenance, Keeney, what would you say other than the HERF?
We have the HERF and the T2050 funding that's used for it, but I don't foresee any federal funding opportunities or outside funding. It's pretty much locally.
I just didn't want that to get lost in our conversation, because that's an important piece to us deciding to prioritize things, that if we can leverage additional funding, that would be optimal, in my opinion. Any other questions, comments, anything? All right, if not, we'll now open our public comment period. We have 7 speakers that registered today, and all 7 of them are virtual. We'll give each speaker 2 minutes. We'll start with the virtual participants, which is all we have. And when your name is called in the audio device, it'll be muted, and you begin your remarks. At the conclusion of the virtual speakers, we'll invite in-person folks, which we have none. So we're good. I guess staff is going to handle queuing the folks up to speak. Proceed.
Before we begin, I just want to give some instructions here to the members of the public. Members of the public may speak to comment on the general obligation bond program. The city code requires speakers to present their comments in a respectful and courteous manner. Profane language, threats, or personal attacks on members of the public, council members, committee members, or staff are not allowed. A person who violates these rules will lose the opportunity to continue to speak. The committee and staff cannot discuss or comment on matters relating to pending claims or litigation.
Okay, thank you.
Our first speaker is Jeff Spellman, followed by Jeremy Thacker. Jeff, are you on the line? Jeff is not on the line. Our next speaker is Jeremy Thacker, followed by Stacia Hurst. Jeremy, are you on the line? Jeremy is not on the line. Our next speaker is Stacia Hurst, followed by Nicole Rodriguez. Stacia, are you on the line?
Hello, this is Stacia. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You may proceed.
Hello, Mr. Chairman and subcommittee members. My comment is just a general comment. I know that you guys are probably bombarded with a lot of different presentations on this, and there's only so much money to allocate to go around. I myself live next to a wash that is so flooded, it's destroying the city streets. And we've talked to Kenny himself and other people in the city. We've probably worked with 17 engineers over the course of maybe the last decade. And there's no help, there's no advice, there's no input. It's always just keep spending money without any direction or betterment. 2 weeks ago, I couldn't even drive into my section of the cul-de-sac where I live because of flooding, because of accidents. This happens every year, and I would just really encourage you to, number one, report back to City Council and let them know that these issues are affecting our businesses and our houses, and maybe we need to start dedicating some money from the annual budget into programs like this to preserve and get a more proactive approach, as opposed to just trying to clean up all the chaos after the mess. One of the problems is that there's a 100-year flood every 2 years, and so I think that really needs to be addressed from a level of the city, so that we can all understand how to take care of our drainage ditches and our washes. And that's just basically my comment. Thank you for your time.
You.
Our next speaker is Nicole Rodriguez, followed by Drew Brick. Nicole, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You may proceed.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to address some of the comments that I heard earlier regarding the equity-based mobility program versus the Vision Zero. One thing that you can see identified even on the map is that primarily with the equity-based mobility program, looking at those communities, have a history of being redline communities, if not communities where eventually there was white flight. So they lost a lot of that support and having the infrastructure that they needed from the day that they were constructed. So think about that in the equity-based aspect, but also looking at Vision Zero. Looking at Vision Zero means citywide, where there's that high incidence of deaths and fatalities. And that's a big differential too. So what I heard in the comments and slides when Kenny was discussing it, equity mobility is just getting those folks the basic infrastructure that they needed when those communities were created and were not given, right? So, and then Vision Zero, if you guys have been a part of this discussions, and they've been very helpful, and there's a lot of public information out there, that's a very different program. So please separate the two. If anything, of everything I've heard today, speed cushions was the only subjective one talking about quality of life. Other than where there's safety issues, from aside from what I heard Mr. Boyd talk about, those safety issues would get encompassed. It sounds like either and or in the equity-based and or the Vision Zero, but the rest of it was about quality life. I don't see a strong value if we're having to really look at this. And Mr. Acuna, I did hear you being an engineer. You then would know when we're talking about flooding about cross slope, right? So you understand cross slope and the steepness of cross slopes. So with runoff, we're talking about rain with a steeper cross slope. We see that water sheds very quickly. And with our current mill and overlay process, you're going to have extreme flooding very quickly because we're not doing it to our MAG and city standards. We have extreme cross slopes that even make it hard for ADA folks to cross in our crosswalks. They're so steep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Drew Brick, followed by Chad Cordless. Drew, are you on the line?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You may proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the time. I'm here to talk about drainage as well. My property is located just south of Thomas on 7th Street, and I've flooded routinely. Most recently on July 30th, the water tops the curb, comes in the front door. So to Mr. Acuna's point, I agree with him in the sense that there's no greater sense of dread that occurs when you have the feeling of helplessness when the street's coming over the curb and it's coming for your door and there's really nothing you can do about it. So that said, I just wanted to commend this committee. I support your work. I think it's important. The bond initiative I support to fix the drainage areas that are presented today. I can probably understand or be uniquely positioned to understand how the residents of these Levine and Hohokam area folks are feeling if they're also getting water in their front door. And so if we're able to fund these projects, that we can start, the city can start chipping away at some of the backlog of projects, of flooding issues, with paying particular attention to flooding that actually goes through the doors, not just yards, but actually through doors. And yeah, and then also echoing the point of, it's probably time for some dedicated drainage funding that occurs yearly that isn't just, reliant on, stimulus funds here and there. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Chad Cordless, followed by Robert Graham. Chad, are you on the line?
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of my fellow public safety brothers and sisters and our friends, families, and neighbors. I'm a native Phoenician, but I'm also a Phoenix firefighter. When I was hired 26 years ago, since then, I've been lucky to have had many wonderful mentors and leadership who have preached that it is up to us to leave this department in better condition than we found it. We owe it to the next generation of our first responders to leave them with a greater ability to serve our community that we promised to take care of, but our system is failing. We should all be concerned about the health and welfare of those who put on a uniform every day to serve you all, those in our communities. 66% of our units, projected soon to be 76%, respond to over 3,000 incidents annually, which negatively impacts response times. Sleep deprivation, exposure to stress and carcinogens leads to an alarming increase in physical injuries, mental health problems, and cancer diagnoses. All of these things not only have a social, but a fiscal cost to the city. What are conditions going to be like in 5 to 10 years or beyond? Our ability to keep up with increasing needs of our communities has reached a failure point. We do not catch up with and ultimately get ahead of this increased demands for service. The strain on our first responders is going to become unbearable, and inadequate service delivery will become inevitable. Most importantly, I speak as a Phoenix resident. Daily, there's a real potential that our family, my family, friends, and neighbors could be in dire need of fire or EMS care. So as a citizen, I am incredibly concerned with the understaffing of our fire department, the lack of adequate coverage, and the dangerously increasing response times. Knowing firsthand that seconds and minutes can literally mean the difference between life and death, or between full recovery or a lifetime of health deficits. Phoenix is a great place to live, work, and to raise a family. Phoenix encourages business development and population growth. This has been good in many ways. However, the city has not put the time, energy, or resources necessary to keep up with the demands that this growth has brought. I believe that it is irresponsible for the city to encourage growth without keeping up with the service requirements that population growth demands. The city of Phoenix needs to look at this as an investment in our community and our future. We want Phoenix to continue to be a destination, then we owe it to our first responders and to our citizens to make the funding of our public safety department the highest priority. Thank you in advance for giving the adequate attention, funding, and prioritization to this issue that it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our final speaker today is Robert Graham. Robert, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You may proceed.
All right, thank you. So my name is Bob Graham. I'm the president of the Grand Avenue Members Association, also known as GAMA. I'm here to ask you to consider funding for the Greening Lower Grand Avenue plan as part of the bond program. Lower Grand Avenue stretches from Van Buren Street to I-10, so it's just the part right around downtown. 11 years ago, the city got a grant from the EPA to do a planning program that was adopted by council in 2012 that created Phoenix's first real complete street, or at least a plan for the first complete street that balances, other considerations and not just cars and trucks. So emphasizing sustainability, resiliency, as well as revitalization of our historic area. So in 2014, there was a very small portion of that plan that was done. It was kind of nicknamed the low-hanging fruit plan. It did the road diet. Mostly it was anything that you could do with paint. But there are substantial amounts of the plan that were never enacted, never constructed. And those include all of the stormwater management features, which includes sections of pervious pavement, drain swales, creation of the gateways at the north and south ends of the street, enhancement of street intersections and pedestrian ways, enhancing landscaping and tree cover, as well as art and wayfinding elements. So this is a plan that I think moving forward offers a lot of far-ranging benefits to the city. And obviously, it would support and assist the historic area and the economic viability of this area close to downtown. But it's also a destination for residents and visitors. And most importantly, in my view, this is a plan that can serve as a model and a case study for improvement of other city streets and commercial districts in the future. So I encourage you to look at the potential for this to address this bond issue, to address not only these maintenance issues and these very important things that you've been discussing, but also how we can look to the future for sustainability and resiliency. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was our final speaker for today.
None from the public that are here today, correct? Just virtual? Anybody else? Okay, that concludes our public comment period. subcommittee members, based on some of the input you received, is there anything you'd like to add to future agenda items as we move forward? Mr. Boyd?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am interested in actually, if we can, there's a lot of things that happen in these programs that maybe we need to go a little bit deeper into. There's items like Mr. Graham talked about bioswales, for instance. I think there's areas that overlap and we can really maximize our investment, and would be nice to hear about those in the different things that we're talking about. If we're doing a flood program, can we also actually make it a complete street at the same time, or vice versa when we're talking about the T2050 mobility programs? I think those are a very strong opportunity for green and low impact infrastructure, and really describing what that is and what that means for the other impacts with flood. That's just, I don't know exactly how that fits in, if that's more detail on these or if it's more on that. I'll tell you that I've had people talk to me and ask me to suggest things like a protected bicycle network throughout the city and transit shelters being funded, but those may be just requests for information from staff later.
Okay, and my understanding is you shared some information with Mr. Knutson in reference to a number of items that you were interested in. Would you like to articulate those for the record, or how would you like to proceed, Mr. Boyd?
Sure, Mr. Chair. I sent in on July a request to staff for information about the costs for various traffic control devices. Very happy to hear that we had that sent in to the committee, and would love to enter that into the record, especially because I think a second part to that down the line, perhaps in a future memo as we finalize this, is I'd love to be able to report back how many miles of protected bike lanes could be built here, how many pedestrian improvements would be shaded, cool corridors, things like that. I think those are things that the voters will want to know about what they're being asked to invest. So I would like to enter the current memo, which, thank you to staff, excellent memo, and then just put that on the radar. Maybe not the next meeting, but maybe as we wrap things up.
Okay. Mario, to that point, you good with that? Okay.
Got it. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Anything else from the subcommittee? Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the staff for a great presentation. One item on the Project Zero and the safety, the access, mobility stuff, I would encourage a very strong public awareness program. I mean, if you're out driving at night, you know, you see people, they're wearing, you know, something as simple as wearing light-colored clothing, you know, walking on the, you know, not along with traffic, but walking against traffic. You know, maybe a little bit more public awareness, or a strong program to build public awareness about some of these basic pedestrian ideas might help. Thank you.
Anything else, Madam Coles-Henry?
Yes, I'd like to thank staff also for the thoroughness of the information shared today, and I'd like to, Chair, also revisit my statement earlier about public education. If possibly staff could take a look at the areas within these proposals to see where that's palatable to add that information in, it would be helpful to make that assessment. Because those are other partnership opportunities, I believe, with other city departments, other partnering agencies within state government, county government, and of course in the community.
Thank you. Anything else from this side over here? Anybody? Okay. The next meeting is September 9th. I encourage committee members to make sure they get with staff as to their availability. This committee is subject to a quorum in order to advance items, so to the degree that you can let us know whether you can make it or not would be extraordinarily helpful for us to make sure we can advance this program. I know we have a fast timeline, but your involvement is extraordinarily important, not only to what we're working on, but also to making sure that we have a quorum. With that, do I need to call for a motion to adjourn, or can I just declare adjourning? Because I have very, people give me different advice on that.
You can just declare adjournment.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.